Hello everyone, welcome to Memento Mori Monday, or welcome back to Memento Mori Monday. My name is Emmy, I am a death doula. I've been practicing for 10 years. Today we'll be talking about sin eaters. What is a sin eater? Are they even still around? I wanted to take a little break from the practical part of Memento Mori Monday that we've been doing. That isn't going to go away forever. It's more like I've been wanting to spend a little bit more time exploring what the series was always supposed to be, more broadly about death work, about history, things of that nature. Because had I not been an anthropologist, I would not have gone to become a death doula. Feels like it's important to pay homage to all of the different layers of what ultimately informed my journey. That's the tea. That's what's going on. That's what's going on here today. What is a sin eater? A sin eater is somebody that was tasked with consuming a ritual meal by virtue of the food absorbing the sin. The sin eater would absorb the sin of the person who has recently passed, therefore absolving them of their sins. In 1838, Kathryn Sinclair, quote, by swallowing bread and beer with a suitable ceremony before the corpse, he was supposed to free it from every penalty for past offenses, appropriating the punishment to himself. Cultural anthropologists and folklorists have both framed sin eating as not just like a little one-off thing, but it really does fulfill the criteria for a ritual and all the different kind of mannerisms that entails. Because you're taking somebody or something at one phase through a liminal process, and now the other person or thing is now changed permanently. So even though there are some differences across the board about what is sin eating, the core of it is that there is like a transmutation element about it, and ultimately it is still a ritual. It does remain like less studied, unfortunately. We are aware of it. Like, okay, it's kind of happening here, kind of happening here. It has been a bit more under-researched, and I think part of that has to do with maybe it is a bit more clandestine from like location to location. It could be that there is more gatekeeping around it, and by virtue of there being a social exclusion element, it just happens so under the radar because they're socially outcast. As far as where it has taken place across history, we're seeing it most commonly occur in Scotland, Ireland, Wales, English counties bordering Wales. We do see, though, in Mesoamerican civilization, like going even further back, the Aztec goddess Tlazolteotl, the goddess of many things, virtue, purification, steam baths, the patroness of adulterers. Her name does literally mean sacred filth. She has a very like redemptive role about her and her many iterations. She's also very much giving Hecate with how much she covers. At the end of an individual's life, the thing that she could really grant people and really help support them through is that you would confess her sins, like you'd be brought before her. Before you transition, you could speak your misdeeds, and then she would swallow them up, therefore eating your filth, and then you'd be able to carry on in the next life. In 1911, the Encyclopedia Britannica stated several different things about sin eaters that kind of helped to build together more of a narrative of the different ways it's shown up and how different people have related to it. So as far as like sin eating as a through line, we have the Dutch doodkoeks, dead cakes, and those are constructed where you have the initials of the person who passed stenciled in kind of deal. And those were given to the attendants at funerals at a certain point in what is like now Old New York in Shropshire in 1893, after a preliminary service had been held over the coffin. It was more old school, like when funerals would take place in the home, like in the parlor, hence the term funeral parlor being glommed on by the funeral industry. It took place over the coffin, and then a woman was like cited as like pouring a glass of wine out for each bearer and handed it to them across the coffin with a funeral biscuit. And I find that very interesting to, because we also have an account of, at the time that that article was written, in Upper Bavaria, which is now Germany, at the time, sin eating still endured. It was still going on in Germany at that time. A corpse cake is placed on the breast of the dead and then eaten by the nearest relative, while in the Balkan Peninsula, a small bread image of the deceased is made and then eaten by the survivors of the family. We do have few instances where sin eating is a communal thing. It's not strictly falling onto one person to facilitate and to take on all of it. And it is more a matter of it being a collective act of commemoration, of celebration, of integrating that they are all like a part of us now. It does feel a bit more symbolic in that capacity, that everybody would do it, or that it would be more communal than falling on a single person to absorb all of the sin. We do also see that burial cakes have their existence in other small ways. Even to this day, a lot of rural parts of England, Lincolnshire, Cumberland, the relic, as I say, of sin eating is more of like a memento or a traditional funeral food, like how like lemon cakes are like a thing. Gotta have the coffee and cheese and like crackers, or like a Puerto Rican funeral. Gotta have guava there for some reason. Here's where I think things began to deviate a little bit. In 1926, a book called Funeral Customs by Bertram S. Puckle mentions Sin Eater as a social pariah and ultimately kind of like an occult figure. Professor Evans of the Presbyterian College, Carmarthen, allegedly saw a Sin Eater about the year 1825. Abhorred by the superstitious villagers as a thing unclean, the Sin Eater cut himself off from all social intercourse with his fellow creatures by reason of the life he had chosen. He lived as a rule in a remote place by himself, and those who chanced to meet him avoided him as they would a leper. This unfortunate was held to be the associate of evil spirits, given to witchcraft, incantations, and unholy practices. Only when a death took place did they seek him out, and when his purpose was accomplished, they burned the wooden bowl and platter from which he had eaten the food, handed across, or placed on the corpse for his consumption. And even the aforementioned Sinclair noted, men who undertook so daring an imposture must all have been infidels, willing, apparently, to sell their birthright for a mess of pottage. That's a very shady thing to say, because a mess of pottage apparently means something valueless or trivial. So like you went and you took on someone's sins and you're getting nothing back in return. Actually, you're getting negative back in return. So I find that so deeply interesting that we have, on one hand, a narrative of it being family-oriented, being communal, that it's all a matter of respect and supporting the dead. And then we have this other layer where, again, deeply syncretic, and that way it does feel very Christian-oriented to be worried about the soul, the sins of the person who's passed. But also there's that occult kind of influence of they're damaged. They themselves are unclean. That mentality around them that once it had been done could not be erased. There is no sin eater for the sin eater, which I find very interesting. But we have the narrative shift even further, where we have a local legend in Shropshire, in England. The last recorded sin eater in the area was Richard Munslow. He died in 1906, and he was not poor. He was not like a social outcast by any stretch. Leading up to it, he was a wealthy farmer. His family was very well established. They were well-to-do people. Munslow, I think, revived the custom due to it being a matter of having a personal ritual that could absolve him of the deep grief he was feeling. Because Munslow had, in 1870, he lost 3 of his children in 1 week due to scarlet fever. Deeply devastating. I can't fathom losing a child, let alone losing 3. And There wasn't necessarily like grief counseling in the same way. There were still rites and things of that nature, but I imagine threw him into such a deep depression that I think it was integral for him to absolve himself. I think he likely already felt sin was like befalling his family for that to have happened to three of his children. So it ultimately gave him a sense of closure, of control, of a ritual that he could fall onto to better support himself. I think for him was a way of supporting his children who had passed so suddenly. I do love that we have a little snippet of a speech. I don't know if it's true for everybody. Again, it's a little bit up in the air about what were the commonalities across the board for sin eating. At least for him, he had a short speech. I give easement and rest now to thee, dear man, that ye walk not down the lanes or in our meadows. And for thy peace I pawn my own soul. Amen. So that's part of why I'm like, it had to have been a matter of it giving him a sense of closure and completion. With them being young children, a lot of our mentality as well, having been raised Catholic, is that unbaptized children cannot go on to heaven the same way if they were to pass suddenly. Unbaptized children end up in limbo, which is different than purgatory. Try as I may, you can't take all the Catholic out. This can't be done. What I find really lovely is that we have, again, this back and forth of sin eating being something communal, sin eating being something that makes somebody a social pariah, being a method of providing emotional closure in a very personal, deeply traumatizing experience. And I think it's a good kind of culminating piece here is not too long ago, campaigners raised about £1,000 to restore the grave of Richard Mallow, who was buried in Rattling Hope in 1906. Locals did take a lot of pride in gathering together to restore the grave. It had fallen into great disrepair leading up to that point. September 19, 2010, so it was a good 15 years ago that they got together to make that happen. But yeah, they had a really good campaign around the neighborhood. They got that collective power going. We love to see it. And really worked hard to restore his grave. Local stonemason Charles Shaw took it on and they made it happen. Even though it is something that the church found disreputable, they didn't care for it, the whole sin eating thing. They felt it was undermining their tradition and found it deeply pagan as well. So on one hand, there was still that kind of sentiment behind it. They were still like, we're not endorsing sin eating here. But Reverend Norman Morris, the head of the church who spearheaded the whole initiative, did make it clear that I can denounce the practice of sin eating and I don't want it to be revived. But at the same time, he did acknowledge that Mallow is a representative of the overall sin eating custom in that area. And it would be doing him a great disservice as a figure of religious history to let his grave fall into disrepair and to stay that way. I do want to give kudos where they're due for the ability to hold space around, I don't like it, I don't approve of it, but I have to give credit where credit is due. And sin eating gave people what they needed in a time where maybe there was distrust around the church, or if there wasn't a whole lot of presence of the church in certain areas. Ergo, sin eating felt like the most appropriate way to honor those that have passed and to ensure that they were able to carry on to the next world as anybody else could or would. And I also want to give a little bit of a hat tip to Max Miller of Tasting History. He does have a video up that's a few years old by now, and it covers how funeral biscuits are made. He goes through a recipe in case you want to explore that for your own sake because you would want to revive that kind of tradition for your own family, or if it's strictly a matter you're curious, if you want to do a Victorian spooky situation for the season, I think that could be a lot of fun to do as well. By all means, if it does speak to you, then give it a go. Why not? Just because it got spun into something that made somebody a social outcast, it doesn't mean that it should stop us from either reviving it if it's very much aligning with our systems of belief, or maybe you just love the idea of being able to bake really awesome biscuit at someone's end of life. And it may have nothing to do with sin at all. And to each their own. Thank you all for watching. Let me know down below what you thought of this one, and would you want a sin eater at your last rites? Would you sin eat, maybe as like the main one or communally? How does that resonate for you? Does it vibe, does it not? Thank you to my patrons. This video could not have happened without you all. Thank you to my seekers and to my alchemists. And a very special thank you to my Conjurer Tier members. I want to thank Karena, Georgia, Jess, Laura, Rachel, and Mallow. Thank you all for being conjurers at the highest tier. I appreciate you all so much. And I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.